Hi, everyone.
Hello again. We're on page 54 of the Proclaimer's book. It's talking about the changes in the early years of the Russellite movement. Of course, they didn't call themselves that, but that's what their neighbors called them for reasons that will become obvious. This subsection is Headquarters at the Bible House. The Bible students in Allegheny, associated with the publishing of the Watchtower, were considered the most experienced in doing the Lord's work and were looked to by all the ecclesias, or congregations, as those taking the lead. At first they had headquarter offices at 101 Fifth Avenue, Pittsburgh, and later at 44 Federal Street, Allegheny. In the late 1880s, however, expansion became necessary, so Russell arranged to build larger facilities. In 1889, a four-story brick building at 56 to 60 Arch Street, Allegheny, was completed. Valued at $34,000, it was known as the Bible House. It served as the Society's headquarters for some 19 years. As of 1890, the small Bible House family was serving the needs of several hundred active associates of the Watchtower Society. But as the decade of the 1890s progressed, more showed interest in what these were doing. In fact, according to an incomplete report published in the Watchtower on March 26, 1899, the memorial of Christ's death was observed at 339 separate meetings with 2,501 participants. What, though, would help to keep the growing number of Bible students united?
Then there's a box on the page, why called pastor? Charles Taze Russell was referred to by his associates as Pastor Russell. Why? Because of his activities in shepherding the flock of God. Ephesians 4:11 states that Christ would give to his congregation some as pastors or shepherds. Brother Russell certainly did serve as a spiritual shepherd in the Christian congregation. In view of the pastoral work that he was doing under the chief shepherd, Jesus Christ, certain congregations acknowledged by vote that he was their pastor. It was not a self-assumed title. The first group to vote him their pastor was the congregation in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in 1882. Thereafter, he was voted pastor by some 500 other congregations in the United States and Britain. Back then, it was customary for the congregations to vote each year for those who would preside among them. Today, Christian elders among Jehovah's Witnesses are not elected by local congregations, but are appointed by the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Care is also exercised not to use expressions such as pastor or elder as titles.
Oh boy. Start with the statistics they give you here for 1899. 2,500 participants at the memorial in 339 separate groups. So if you work out the stats there, you're talking about groups of average size 7 or 8.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been much growth in those first 20 years, despite the fact that this extremely aggressive publishing campaign.
Yeah.
By then, he'd published, he'd published 5 of the books of the Millennial Dawn series and Tabernacle Shadows. So it's not working very well, although he's getting an awful lot of attention because they're buying space in newspapers, etc. But I think the thing that strikes me the most, though, is this in the box, this jump to Ephesians 4, Christ giving the pastors to the church. And the obvious question is, who pastored Pastor Russell? I mean, if that's what Christ has done for the church for the whole 1900 years.
And it's plural here. And yet, you know, they try and hide the fact that he was the leader. You know, that he's voted in. They're only reading his stuff.
Yeah.
They're listening to him.
He didn't seek this title. You know, they gave it to him. Well, couldn't you have turned it down, therefore? And by the way, is a pastor ever the pastor of 500 churches?
Yeah.
That's more like what we call in Christendom bishops.
Yeah.
And bishops of that. So this is not the definition of pastor in the New Testament.
Yeah.
which is a synonym for elder in a local congregation.
They were known as Russellites.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty obvious that he was the one that was leading the group, and it was his stuff that they were reading. And he said Bible prophecy was fulfilled through him. So this is not somebody who's downplaying his role.
Of course, in the beginning, he wasn't called the faithful and wise servant, nor was he called the voice of Jehovah, as he was in the finished mystery after his death.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody viewed him as that, right?
Yeah.
So
And he let it happen.
why were his books...
Eventually, he did think he was the FDS.
It appears so, although he didn't go about bragging about it, but everybody regarded him as the fulfillment of the prophecy.
Yeah.
But why would they even call Millennial Dawn those books?
Because they thought they were already in it, the millennium.
Yeah, Millennial Dawn changed its name. The group of books, the 6 books, became known later as Studies in the Scriptures. And I think the obvious reason is that they realized now they were anchored to the date of 1872-73 as the beginning of the millennium. So it only made sense that God was restoring true worship if you're in the millennium.
Yeah. I think the last paragraph, too, in the box where they talk about elected by local congregations, that not happening anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Russell was pretty forceful about that at the beginning, that it should be the local congregation's business, how they do things.
Yeah.
And he was very much against organization. And they've just switched it completely around.
This is one thing that, of course, you need the history of the Watchtower to get light on, that the elder arrangement was very much there until Rutherford removed it, and then in the 70s it was brought back again.
Yeah. And then this governing body stuff. He was very against organization. He said, no organization.
And no name.
And no name, yeah. Because then you're like everybody else. That was his way of looking at it.
So he said that the only name they would bear would be the name of Jesus Christ. They would be called Christians. And yet, we know what happened. Everybody else viewed them as Russell's people. Russellites. Within a generation, really, while he was still alive. And, of course, afterwards. So we still talk about Russellites today because there are survivors of the original breakaway groups that broke away when Rutherford took over. And they're called that because they still dedicate themselves to the thought that Russell is the man that God has been using since 1880 approximately.
I also thought it was a very weak comment. This care is also exercised not to use expressions such as pastor or elder as titles, as if we don't recognize who's the elder in the congregation and fear them.
It's far more real for the local Jehovah's Witness in his congregation than it is for people who have so-called reverence. The respect, like you said, the word is fear.
Yeah.
It's not just respect. It's fear of outcome. And so for all you belabor this point that Christendom has all these official titles, you're dynamic in your local congregation and above it in the presiding overseer idea and in the circuit overseer idea and all of the other stuff.
It's got more clout, I would say, than you ever see in church congregations. Like you don't see them having enormous clout if they're in a position.
We've said that before, that we wish there were more accountability and more authority in Protestant churches. What are the links again?
Just one. It's a Ray Franz link. Ray Franz said, Russell said, no organization, no name but Christ.
See you soon.